Addiction is often misunderstood as a simple lack of willpower, but the reality is far more complex. When we observe addicts repeatedly engaging in self-destructive behaviors despite knowing the consequences, it's easy to assume they simply don't care or lack discipline. However, neuroscience reveals that addiction fundamentally alters brain function, hijacking decision-making processes and overriding natural self-control mechanisms. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control and rational decision-making, becomes impaired, while the brain's reward system becomes hyper-focused on the addictive substance or behavior. This imbalance creates a neurological trap where the drive to use overwhelms all other priorities, making self-control nearly impossible without intervention. At the core of addiction lies the brain's reward circuitry, primarily driven by dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, motivation, and reinforcement. Normally, dopamine reinforces healthy behaviors like eating or social bonding, but addictive substances and behaviors flood the brain with unnaturally high dopamine levels, creating an overpowering sense of euphoria. Over time, the brain adapts by reducing its natural dopamine production and diminishing sensitivity to everyday rewards. This means addicts no longer derive pleasure from normal activities, leaving them dependent on their addiction just to feel baseline satisfaction. The pursuit of this artificial reward becomes compulsive, overriding logical thought and long-term consequences. Self-control is largely governed by the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive control center responsible for planning, decision-making, and inhibiting impulsive actions. In addicts, chronic substance use or compulsive behaviors damage the prefrontal cortex, weakening its ability to regulate impulses. Brain imaging studies show reduced activity in this region among addicts, explaining why they often act against their own best interests. Even when they consciously want to quit, their impaired prefrontal cortex struggles to resist cravings. This isn't a moral failing, it's a neurological deficit. The more an addiction progresses, the harder it becomes for the brain to exert self-control without professional treatment. One of the most debilitating aspects of addiction is the relentless nature of cravings. Unlike ordinary desires, which can be postponed or ignored, addictive cravings feel urgent and all-consuming. This happens because addiction rewires the brain's salience network, which determines what grabs our attention. The addicted brain assigns extreme importance to the substance or behavior, making it the primary focus of thoughts and actions. This obsessive mindset crowds out other goals, relationships, and responsibilities, leaving little mental space for self-restraint. Even when an addict recognizes the harm they're causing, the craving's intensity can override their better judgment, creating a cycle of relapse and shame. Many addicts have histories of trauma, chronic stress, or untreated mental health disorders, all of which erode self-control. Stress activates the amygdala, the brain's fear and emotional center, which triggers impulsive reactions as a survival mechanism. For someone with addiction, stress doesn't just provoke anxiety, it intensifies cravings as the brain seeks relief through familiar coping mechanisms like drugs, alcohol, or gambling. Over time, this creates a conditioned response where stress automatically leads to substance use, bypassing rational decision-making. Without healthier coping strategies, addicts remain trapped in this cycle, unable to regulate their emotions or behaviors effectively. As addiction progresses, the body develops tolerance, requiring larger doses to achieve the same effect. This escalates use and deepens dependency. When the substance is absent, withdrawal symptoms, both physical and psychological, emerge, ranging from nausea and pain to severe depression and agitation. Withdrawal isn't just uncomfortable, it creates an overwhelming drive to use again to alleviate distress. At this stage, self-control isn't merely weakened, it's overridden by the brain's survival instincts. The body perceives the substance as necessary for functioning, making abstinence feel physically and mentally unbearable without medical or therapeutic support. Society often frames addiction as a series of poor choices, but in reality, the ability to choose freely erodes as the disease progresses. Early experimentation may involve voluntary decisions, but repeated use alters brain chemistry to the point where autonomy diminishes. Neuroscientists compare addiction to other chronic illnesses like diabetes or hypertension. Once certain thresholds are crossed, the condition becomes self-perpetuating. Addicts don't lack self-control because they're weak. Their brain's reward, stress, and control systems have been fundamentally disrupted, leaving them with fewer functional tools to resist. Another barrier to self-control is the role of denial and distorted thinking patterns. Addiction fosters irrational beliefs such as "I can stop any time" or "this one time won't hurt," which justify continued use. These cognitive distortions are protective mechanisms, the brain's way of avoiding the painful reality of addiction. Over time, these thought patterns become automatic, making it difficult for addicts to accurately assess their behavior. Even when consequences mount, the addicted mind rationalizes the behavior, further undermining attempts at self-regulation. Self-control isn't just an internal struggle, it's heavily influenced by environment. Addicts often face triggers, people, places, or situations associated with past use that provoke intense cravings. The brain forms strong associations between these cues and the addictive substance, creating reflexive urges when exposed. For example, walking past a bar might trigger an alcoholic, or seeing drug paraphernalia might reignite a recovering addict's cravings. These triggers activate the brain's reward memory system, making it exceptionally difficult to resist without deliberate avoidance strategies or coping skills learned in therapy. Many addicts experience profound shame about their inability to control their behavior, which ironically perpetuates the cycle. Shame leads to emotional distress, which the brain seeks to escape through further substance use. This creates a self-defeating loop. The addict tries to quit, fails, feels ashamed, and uses again to numb those feelings. Breaking this cycle requires more than willpower. It demands compassion, professional treatment, and a restructuring of the brain's reward and stress systems through sustained recovery efforts. Not everyone who experiments with drugs or alcohol becomes addicted, and, well, one major factor is genetics. Research shows that addiction has a heritability rate of 40 to 60%, meaning a significant portion of susceptibility is inherited. Certain genetic variations affect how the brain processes dopamine, responds to stress, and metabolizes substances. For example, some people have naturally lower dopamine receptor availability, making them more likely to seek out intense rewards, like drugs, to compensate. Others may have a heightened stress response, leading them to self-medicate with substances for relief. This genetic predisposition doesn't doom someone to addiction, but it does mean their brain may be more vulnerable to losing self-control once substance use begins. Many people confuse bad habits with addiction, but the two operate differently in the brain. Habits are learned behaviors that become automatic through repetition, like biting nails or scrolling through social media. These can be broken with conscious effort and time. Addiction, however, is a chronic brain disorder that rewires fundamental reward, motivation, and memory systems. While habits rely on the basal ganglia, the brain's autopilot system, addiction hijacks the limbic system, which governs emotions and survival instincts. This is why addicts can't simply choose to stop. Their brain has been altered to prioritize substance use above all else, even survival needs like food or shelter. Human beings are deeply social creatures, and our brains are wired to seek acceptance and belonging. For many addicts, especially those who started using in adolescence, peer pressure and social environments play a huge role in eroding self-control. Young brains are still developing impulse control and risk assessment skills, making them more susceptible to external influences. Additionally, if substance use is normalized in one's social circle, the brain begins to associate it with bonding and acceptance. Over time, resisting use can feel like social rejection. a threat the brain instinctively avoids. This social reinforcement makes quitting even harder, as it requires not just breaking a physical dependency, but also risking isolation. A common misconception is that addicts will only change when they hit rock bottom, a point of such extreme consequences that they're forced to regain control. However, this belief ignores how addiction impairs insight and decision-making. Many addicts experience devastating losses, jobs, relationships, health, yet continue using because their brain's reward system is too dysregulated to respond to consequences. Waiting for rock bottom can be dangerous. Intervention and treatment are often necessary before an addict can even recognize the need for change. Recovery isn't about willpower suddenly kicking in, it's about repairing the brain's ability to process rewards and consequences appropriately. Many addicts don't struggle with just one substance. They use multiple drugs, alcohol, or addictive behaviors like gambling in combination. This polysubstance abuse further devastates self-control by disrupting multiple neurotransmitter systems simultaneously. For example, alcohol depresses the central nervous system while stimulants like cocaine overactivate it. This chaotic back and forth confuses the brain's homeostasis, making it nearly impossible to regulate mood, impulses, or decision-making. Withdrawal from multiple substances also creates compounded physical and psychological symptoms, increasing relapse risk. The more substances involved, the more fragmented an addict's cognitive control becomes. A large percentage of addicts have co-occurring mental health disorders, such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, or bipolar disorder, which further erode self-regulation. Mental illness often involves dysregulation in the same brain circuits affected by addiction, creating a vicious cycle. For example, someone with untreated depression may use alcohol to temporarily boost serotonin, but chronic use worsens depressive symptoms over time. This dual diagnosis makes it extremely difficult to exercise self-control, as the brain is battling both addiction and a psychiatric disorder simultaneously. Effective treatment must address both conditions to restore balance. Addiction creates powerful, long-lasting memories that trigger cravings, even after long periods of sobriety. The brain associates substance use with specific cues, smells, sounds, locations, or emotional states through classical conditioning. When exposed to these cues later, the body can react as if the substance is already present, triggering physical cravings. This is why some addicts relapse years after quitting. Their brain never unlearned those associations. Self-control alone can't erase these deeply ingrained pathways. Instead, recovery requires retraining the brain through therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and exposure techniques. Chronic substance abuse severely disrupts sleep architecture, leading to insomnia, fragmented sleep, or poor quality rest. Sleep deprivation has a direct impact on the prefrontal cortex, impairing judgment, emotional regulation, and impulse control. Studies show that tired brains are more likely to seek immediate rewards, like drugs, over long-term benefits such as sobriety. For addicts, this creates a dangerous feedback loop. Substance use ruins sleep, and poor sleep weakens resistance to further use. Restoring healthy sleep patterns is often a critical early step in recovery. Addiction doesn't develop in a vacuum. Early childhood experiences play a significant role in shaping the brain's self-regulation capacities. Adverse childhood experiences such as abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction are strongly linked to later addiction. These traumas can alter stress response systems, impair emotional regulation, and hinder the development of healthy coping mechanisms. Children who grow up in chaotic environments may never learn how to tolerate distress or delay gratification, leaving them more vulnerable to impulsive behaviors as adults. Healing these deep-seated wounds is often essential for lasting recovery. While addiction devastates self-control, the brain retains a remarkable ability to heal, a concept known as neuroplasticity. Through abstinence, therapy, and healthy habits, neural pathways can gradually rewire. Medications like buprenorphine or naltrexone can help stabilize brain chemistry, while behavioral therapies teach new coping skills. Support groups provide accountability and social reinforcement. Over time, the prefrontal cortex can regain function, cravings can diminish, and healthier reward systems can take root. Recovery isn't about restoring the old self, but building a new, resilient self, one capable of making choices aligned with long-term well-being. Addiction isn't a failure of character. It's a complex interplay of brain chemistry, genetics, environment, and trauma. Understanding why addicts struggle with self-control isn't about excusing harmful behavior. It's about recognizing the profound neurological changes that must be addressed for healing to begin. Recovery is possible, but it requires more than willpower. It demands compassion, evidence-based treatment, and a commitment to rebuilding the brain's capacity for choice. If you or someone you love is battling addiction, remember, the first step isn't judgment. It's understanding.